Good evening. My name is Roberta Phillips, and I'm the CEO of the Prince George's County Memorial Library System in Maryland. On behalf of the library and Prince George's County Human Relations Commission, welcome to tonight's special Inauguration Eve event. I also welcome our friends from Worcester County Library System, Howard County Library System, and the Ruth Enlow Library of Garrett County, who are joining us for tonight's program. Tonight's discussion features New York Times bestselling author and journalist Kate Andersen Brower, whose most recent books are Team of Five, The President's Club in the Age of Trump for Adults, and Exploring the White House, Inside America's Most Famous Home for Children. Her previous books are The Residents, First Women, and First in Line. Her work captures the mystique and power of the presidency and the people, from White House resident staff to first spouses who shape daily life in the people's house and represent us on the world stage. Chuck Todd of Meet the Press describes Kate's first book, The Residents, as follows. Americans rarely get a glimpse of what life is really like in the fishbowl that is the White House. Whether you're a political or history junkie or devoted Downton Abbey viewer, The Residents adds unique context to understanding our presidents as human beings, something that's too often forgotten in our daily media grind. She is a CNN contributor, and she covered the Obama administration for Bloomberg News. She is also a former CBS News staffer and Fox News producer. Kate has written for the New York Times, Vanity Fair, and the Washington Post. She lives outside of Washington, D.C. with her husband, their 3 young children, and their wheaten terrier. Be sure to either buy a copy of Kate's books from Loyalty Bookstores at loyaltybookstores.com or borrow them from PGCMLS in print, audiobook, or ebook. Our moderator tonight is Nicholas Brown, the library's COO for Communication and Outreach. Among his many talents and hats, Nick majored in history, was a White House intern in the office of First Lady Michelle Obama, and served in the Army National Guard from 2006 to 2013. I encourage you to share the event link on your social media and tag at PGCMLS and at HRCPG County on your posts. Enjoy the program, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much, Roberta, and would like to give a special shout out to Elle, who is our ASL interpreter tonight. We are so grateful for you, Elle, and to Joyful Signing, which is our partner here in Prince George's County, for making these events accessible. Good evening, Kate. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. So glad you could be here.
Thank you so much, Nick. I didn't know you were an intern in Michelle Obama's office.
Yes, yeah, fall 2011, end of the first term, when we were hearing about Herman Cain's 999 plan, and.
So you have a special interest in first ladies then.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, we're really excited for this opportunity to talk with you, Kate. Aside from your kind of insider knowledge on all these topics, you're one of the few people in our contemporary history who has had the opportunity to both cover the White House and all of the affiliated personalities in your journalism life, and then also produce some really important books that give all of us an opportunity to see behind the scenes of what's going on a day-to-day basis. So I'm super thrilled, and I know that the inauguration is on everyone's mind right now, near and far, and here, of course, in the DC region, and know that you're also a Marylander as well, just on the other side of things. That the events of the last 2 weeks really have taken a toll on all of us. And just in the way, this is our community, this is our home, this is where we hang out, and our friends work in the Capitol building and things like that. So for everyone out there tuning in from outside of the DC area, know that we are all in a really challenging moment right now, especially for those of us who live in the community here. And I'm hopeful that tonight's program can really remind us of the really special things about the presidency that some of which have been missing as tradition has been bucked in the last days and months and years. So what's going through your mind right now, Kate, in this moment with your perspective as an author who's covered all this as well as a journalist?
Well, I'm really thinking about the staff, about the White House staff, the resident staff. It's about 100 people who are the butlers, valets, ushers. Well, valets are technically not resident staff, but they have very close interaction with the president and the first lady. And we know a few of them got COVID when President Trump and his family were not wearing masks, and they were very nervous about working in the White House, and I'm still in touch with some of them. I'm in touch with one resident staffer, and a lot of these people, well, all of them talk on background because they don't want to say their names. They don't want to get fired. They're not supposed to talk to reporters, but they do want to be noticed for their hard work and dedication. And they are the most patriotic people that I've ever encountered. And, I've interviewed, President Trump, President Obama, Jimmy Carter. I mean, these people that are at the height of public awareness, but it's really the staff at the White House who make it tick, and they're not political, which is at least this little island of people. And you probably saw them when you were an intern in the hallways. You don't really know who they are. They're, often in butlers are wearing tuxes and everything. It's a really interesting kind of Downton Abbey feeling there, I think. And they work from one administration to the next. And tomorrow is their big day. They're going to move the Trumps out and the Bidens in, and they have 6 hours to do it. So I'm really thinking about what's going through their minds right now.
Mm-hmm. Speaking about those folks, who you really cover in depth in the residents, there's such a, when I went through that experience, I was 22 or something like that. And the model that they give everyone in terms of professionalism and kindness and generosity and integrity is unmatched by anyone in any setting I've ever seen. And it's something that I think you bring out in the books, which is really awesome. But there is this commitment to, the bigger picture, and it's not about the politics at all. And these people are really successfully figured out a way to remove the politics out of their daily life, even though they're literally embroiled in those moments. But they have to stay neutral and do things kind of Switzerland-like in executing their duties. So just before we get into kind of the inauguration specifics and also the President's Club, I'd love to hear your thoughts generally on where the American people's kind of broad aura and mystique with the presidency came from, and is that something that's really new to the 20th century, or did that kind of develop earlier on, even as going far back as President Washington?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Teddy Roosevelt was the first president to refer to the White House as the White House and make it really stick. Before then it was, it's incredible when Abraham Lincoln was in office, and anybody who's watched movies about the time, you could, as a citizen, walk into the White House, get into the residence, and if you waited long enough, you'd probably get an audience with the President of the United States, and you could air whatever grievance you had, which is kind of hard to believe. But I think we've put presidents on such pedestals, and it's so interesting to me. I love watching prime ministers' questions on C-SPAN, and seeing the way that they treat the prime minister. And, there's not this reverence for the prime minister. They sometimes it's really disrespectful what they're saying, but I think sometimes that we elevate the president in this country to such a degree that as citizens, we've kind of lost the ability to question them enough. And I remember John McCain talking about how, he might go to the Hill and take questions once a week, kind of in that vein. And I always thought that was really intriguing because they are not kings and should not be treated as such. And so I think we see that with Trump. It's just been so divided, and he's looked at it as kind of a imperial presidency, and where he can't really be questioned. There aren't people around him who feel comfortable enough to question him. And so I really hope that the next, several years return us to a sense of normalcy. And we all know, Joe Biden is, even with an event he did today about the 400,000 COVID deaths, he's able to talk to the American people and console the American people. And I think that's what we've been looking for. That's what a lot of people have been looking for over the past 4 years. And sometimes you don't know what you have until it's gone. And then you see it and you say, oh, that's what a president should do, right?
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I really loved in this most recent of your books is the way that the similarities between the presidents kind of come out in terms of, their commitment and their, even though there are political differences and ideological differences, the values that they bring to serving in the office of the president, there's some really interesting commonalities there. Could you speak to that a bit, kind of thinking about maybe President Truman or President Eisenhower forward to today?
Yeah, I mean, Truman and Eisenhower had a really difficult relationship, but they were brought together by this very human moment when JFK was assassinated. And I have a photo in the book that shows these two men where both Truman and Eisenhower, but actually especially Eisenhower, looks completely just devastated. And imagine you're in this small group of former presidents and one of your fellow, the youngest one of your club, is murdered. And I think Eisenhower, we know was not a huge fan of JFK's, and yet JFK would go and consult Eisenhower during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He called every living president asking for their advice. After the Bay of Pigs, he went to visit Eisenhower at Gettysburg. And Eisenhower chastised him and said, I told you this job was hard. And the irony there is that Eisenhower actually had given the go-ahead to the raid before JFK was even president. So JFK kind of had to swallow his pride there and say, I had no idea how hard it would be until I was in it myself. And so, as you say, there's this sense of this mutual understanding of just what the magnitude of this job is. And President Obama said, if you're not humbled by it, then you shouldn't be there. It's incredibly, imagine taking on the weight of the world. And I think this photo where you see Truman also looks crushed. This is after JFK's funeral. And Eisenhower was staying at a hotel with his wife. The Trumans were staying at Blair House across from the White House. And the two men hadn't kept in touch, really. And Eisenhower kind of extended an olive branch and said, can Mamie and I pick you and Bess up and go to the funeral together? And President Truman said, yes. And would you like to stop for coffee and have coffee at Blair House afterwards? And so they had a coffee afterwards and grieved for JFK. And I just think that it says so much, that photo to me, about that mutual respect.
There's a piece about different generations too, especially thinking about Eisenhower and JFK, for example. How did generational differences kind of factor into this? It carries forward to Bill Clinton and HW as well, of course.
Yeah, I think there's a sense of, who is this young kid? Who did, Eisenhower and Mamie, they called Jackie Kennedy the college girl, and they kind of made fun of JFK as this like little rich kid, kind of this sense. I think they were amazed actually at how smart he was in reality, but they at first were dismissive of him. And the Eisenhowers really enjoyed their time in the White House, probably more than any president and first lady I can think of, with the exception of George H.W. Bush and Barbara Bush, right? They loved it. Because Eisenhower had been leading U.S. forces in Europe during World War II. His wife rarely saw him, and she was this doting 1950s, housewife. At least that's what she wanted people to think. And she loved being able to spend time with him, and she loved decorating the White House and kind of leaning into that. So they were not happy to leave. And I mean, the Trumps, clearly Donald Trump isn't happy to leave either. I think it takes a lot to be able to gracefully bow out of that position.
Yeah. To open a slight can of worms that I probably shouldn't open, but so comparing President Truman to President Trump, there is the full range of like financial integrity and ethics in terms of taking advantage of the office, certainly during, but post-presidency, I'm guessing as well. Can you kind of compare the different approaches that folks have had in terms of kind of walking that line of leveraging the fact that they were president for their own financial stability versus really taking back and putting the kind of perception of the office above their own personal gain?
Well, I mean, I happen to really admire Gerald Ford, but he is the first president who monetized it in such a way. You know, he would go on corporate boards and he didn't have a ton of money. They didn't come from money. And he had been in Congress for a long time. And so the way they could monetize the years in the White House was going on these corporate boards. It's not a heavy lift and you get paid a lot of money, right? But, you know, someone like Harry Truman was just incredible. You know, he had the famous plaque on his desk, "The buck stops here," and Jimmy Carter actually borrowed that plaque from the Truman Library and put it on his desk in the Oval Office because Truman was Jimmy Carter's favorite president. And when he would sign books, Truman wouldn't even use pens like a Sharpie with the, you know, Sharpie insignia on it because he didn't want to look like he was endorsing a brand of pen. I mean, it's the polar opposite of Donald Trump. Right. So there's just, you can't really think of anyone more different. And the funny thing is when I interviewed Donald Trump in the Oval Office, it was a strange, surreal experience. And he said that the president, you know, most of the living former presidents, he feels like Jimmy Carter was given an unfair shake. And I thought that you can't think of anybody less like Donald Trump than Jimmy Carter, except for maybe Harry Truman. So they just don't look at the presidency the same way. They want to do good. And I think Harry Truman, you know, he was a former president when there was no funding for former presidents. He didn't have any Secret Service agents. I mean, it's kind of incredible. You could just walk up to him in Independence, Missouri, and people had conversations with him. And so he didn't care about money quite as much. He did sell, you know, I think it was for Life magazine. I have it in the book. He also wrote a memoir to make money. He needed it.
Yeah. Would you like to talk us through some of the other photos?
Yeah. The next photo, and I don't have a ton, but I like this. It's Lyndon Johnson and Harry Truman. And Lyndon Johnson went to Independence, Missouri to deliver the first Medicare card to Harry Truman. And he said, you know, you're the granddaddy of Medicare. You and Bess will have card number 1 and card number 2. And, you know, yes, they're both Democrats, so you would expect there to be a friendship there. But look at George W. Bush and Donald Trump. They're both Republicans, and there's no friendship there. I just think that this is a really respectful moment. And, you know, it's an actual policy that he followed through on for Harry Truman. And it's actually means something huge. It's something that obviously people still rely on today, most older Americans. So it's an important moment. You can go to the next one.
Sure.
If you want.
One thread on LBJ that I thought was really important in the book was part of his thinking behind not running for that 1968 election because he was concerned about his own mortality, but then also did not want to put the country through the loss of another president. Can you just kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about the inauguration tomorrow and different oaths of office that have been taken over the years. And I think a lot of people are looking at tomorrow as the most consequential inauguration since, 1933 when FDR took over during the Great Depression, or maybe 1861 when Abraham Lincoln became president, and states in the South were seceding from the Union. I mean, it was become, that moment in history. You can't overstate how consequential that was. But I think the thing I always think of is LBJ being sworn in on Air Force One and the country going through that crisis and the way that the trauma of being in the motorcade, seeing the president killed, thinking it was part of something bigger. And so he didn't make that decision until the last minute. I mean, I interviewed Bess Abel, who was this social secretary for the Johnsons, who lived in Potomac and unfortunately just passed away. But she was wonderful. And she remembered that night, and she remembered watching that speech. She was so close to the Johnsons and had no idea what he was going to do. Mm-hmm. The only person who really knew was Lady Bird. Wow. And so, yeah, I think it was his health. Lady Bird didn't want him to run again. Everyone in his family, every man in his family, he said, died by a certain age, and he did. I think it was pretty young, at 64 or something like that. And he died so soon after he left office because he left and, smoked like a chimney and drank and ate whatever he wanted to and kind of let himself go because it was over. And I think Vietnam if you had to name one reason why why LBJ left, I think it was just the toll of Vietnam and having, you know, both of his daughters were married to men who were serving, and you know, his daughter said, "Is my husband going to come home?"
Wow.
You know, and just like knowing that personal toll, I think is what took its toll on him.
Cool, thank you.
Oh yeah, this was a lunch that George W. Bush hosted in the Oval Office for the living former presidents right before Barack Obama was inaugurated. And it's funny because Jimmy Carter, you know, it was kind of an outsider from this group, and they all did get pretty annoyed with him at different times in their presidencies, because he would, you know, write scathing op-eds about different policies. You know, obviously he went after the war in Iraq, but he criticized everyone. If he didn't agree with you, he was going to make it known. And so they made it a lunch, and so one of their advisors told me that they were hoping that he wouldn't show up because he kind of got under everyone's skin. I think he's one of the most incredible former presidents, and you know, he doesn't get as much credit for his time in office, right? But I like this photo a lot because actually Obama was the one who suggested this lunch, and Bush went ahead with it.
It's also the cover of the book.
Yeah, it is also the cover of the book. This is I thought this was an interesting photo because it's Donald Trump's cuffs of a shirt, and you can't see it too clearly here, but it says 45 on it. And he was so obsessed with being among this group of men, but yet at the same time, he felt so ostracized by them. And so I asked him, you know, do you think you're going to be accepted by this group of former presidents? And he said, what do you think? Of course not. They don't like me because I had to do what was right. And, you know, it's almost like he feels like he's an outcast, and so there's nothing he could do to ever make them happy. When in fact, if you go over the list of attacks and things he's done, he's made it impossible for them to accept him. And I know that George W. Bush, in my reporting for the book, was would compare this time in history to the Civil War and tell friends, you know, we got through that and we'll get through this too. Mm-hmm. So publicly, he's been critical of Trump, but he doesn't mention him by name very much. And I don't know about you, but I always wonder why he won't kind of take that step and mention his name. But I think it's because he's got nephews who are running for office, and mm-hmm. he can't really break away from the Republican Party like he might want to. Mm-hmm. I don't know. But that's that photo. This is a great, I like this photo just because it's the globe in the physician's office in the White House, and every president has signed it. And I think one of the things about the former presidents is the surprising friendships. And I think we all know about George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton, right? But I was really struck in reporting the book was the relationship between Bush and Obama, and that the last person to see Bush 41, as he's called, alive was Barack Obama. You know, that's an amazing thing. Obama was in Houston for an event. Bush was doing very badly, not taking any visitors, but this had been a long planned trip. This was just, I believe, 3 days before he passed. And Obama went to his house, and it was John Meacham, Neil Bush, and then Obama kind of, and George H.W. Bush was in his wheelchair in the center of the room, and these men surrounded him, and they talked a bit about politics. And then, but I couldn't really find out exactly. Only Obama really knows what they discussed, because at one point he asked if he could have time alone with Bush, and Meacham and Bush's son left the room. And I just think that's really a beautiful thing, because, you know, these are men who are so different in terms of their ideology, race, age, I mean, everything, but yet there's this respect between them. Mm-hmm. And we've lost a lot of that. And I think with Biden, he's kind of the ultimate member of this kind of club, right? Like, he'll bring that back.
Yeah.
This is the, after the tsunami, this is Bush 41 and Bill Clinton, they went on this great trip. And we know after Hurricane Katrina, they did much the same thing. They had a lot of fun on these trips. They bonded. Bush would, joke around with Clinton about being late all the time. Clinton, let Bush have the bed on the plane and, because he was the elder statesman. I mean, I think that there is that father figure relationship. It seems very genuine to me. Of course, Clinton didn't, he didn't know his birth father, and then his stepfather was an alcoholic. And so this was a stable force in his life. And so I think that's, again, an incredible story. And it's not as surprising as the Obama-Bush relationship to me. I also was surprised that George W. Bush didn't wasn't the last person to see his father alive, the last president. And I was told by one of his aides that he just had thought his dad was going to pass for so long. It was such a long time coming that he had said goodbye so many times before. So that's why he wasn't there.
Gotcha.
This is the Bush library, the Bush 43 library, George W. Bush and all the former presidents. Bush was, made a lot of jokes, and Clinton joked about how, this is every former president's opportunity to rewrite history in their libraries. One thing Bush did do that I thought was really interesting is, and of course you have to take this with a grain of salt, but that there in his library, there are letters from people, and he has them framed up on the walls. And his first walkthrough, they were all positive letters. And he took the library director aside and said, I want you to include some of the bad ones too. And I think that says a lot about somebody, that he was willing to put up the negative letters that he received. Of course, I mean, when the Bushes left office, people were booing Bush on stage during the inauguration. People were happy to see him go. And so I think it's important to remember how controversial he was. And I think Trump is definitely, I don't know what you think, but I feel like it's really helped him approval ratings. Yeah. Yep.
And it's so interesting with the presidential libraries to compare the different ones. I got to visit the FDR library recently, and I've been to the JFK library a bunch, and I did get to go to the W. Bush library. And if you kind of go into it knowing that this is a very curated interpretation of their legacy, it will help you kind of with the whole process of digesting it. But I really highly recommend it to anyone to check out these presidential libraries, not just for the presidents who you are supportive of personally, but the history of our country is really told on those walls, albeit from, again, a legacy crafting perspective, but it really helps kind of jog the mind. And it's kind of remarkable to me to see the whole 9/11 era up in a museum setting already, and when it's something that we all lived, at least if you're millennial and up.
Hyde Park is so beautiful too.
Yes.
FDR's library is amazing. This is hard to see. I apologize. This is the Bush funeral. And so I interviewed Trump shortly after the Bush funeral, and he was very proud that he went, and that's the thing about him that's so surprising. And I think we're going to see it tomorrow with the 21 gun salute at Andrews, right? It's that he revels in the ceremony of the presidency, but the personal relationships that are what make the presidency important, he just has no interest in. And it's a strange relationship he has with it. And so he kind of jutted his chin out proudly that he was at the Bush funeral. And, and the Bush people wanted him very much to be there because they thought McCain's funeral was all about Donald Trump. And sadly, that is kind of how it turned out. So by not, inviting him, it would have sent that message. We know Barbara Bush didn't want him at her funeral, but George H.W. Bush was like following by the rules and playing by the rules. And this is a former president, and he gets invited no matter what. Barbara and Laura Bush have a great relationship. And I think a lot of that, the seeds of that were in the transition in 2008 2009, the Bush handover, by all accounts, was very thoughtful. Laura Bush's chief of staff was in close contact with Michelle Obama's chief of staff, giving her, a playbook essentially of what first ladies are expected to do, and down to kind of the nitty gritty details of like, this is an event you don't have to do. You can skip this. You should do that. Could you please continue this, support for this organization? I mean, it was very specific, and we don't see any of that today because we know that Melania Trump hasn't invited Dr. Biden to the White House for the traditional tour, which I think is very disappointing because, but not surprising. But it is important obviously Dr. Biden knows that where they're going to be sleeping, but it's about the symbolism. And one interesting thing I found out from a resident staffer is that Melania actually slept in the presidential bedroom. And I think we're putting this in a CNN story, if it's not in there already, that she slept in the presidential bedroom, and the president slept in sort of a room next door that's not as large. So the Bidens are moving in together to sleep in Melania's bedroom, which is kind of different. They'll be staying in the same room together.
Very interesting.
Yeah. I'm surprised he let her have a bigger room. I was just surprised by that. Michelle Obama hugging George Bush. This is a really famous photo. And this is at the Smithsonian, the African American Museum opening. And, I think it just says so much about both the Obamas and the Bushes that they want these photos out there. And I think tomorrow, one thing I'm really looking for is what's going to happen at Arlington, and the fact that the 3 former presidents and first ladies will be there with the Bidens at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier for this wreath-laying ceremony. It's so important, and I think it's just so, it's going to be very moving, and I think people might be caught off guard by what a sight that's going to be. And yes, these are all career politicians. You could say, this is the old guard, the establishment, but I really feel like there's just a civility and, an empathy among these people for, I think one of the hardest things that any first lady experiences is these one-on-one meetings that, like Laura Bush meeting with grieving families after 9/11, Michelle Obama going to Charleston after the church shooting, like all of these, or Hadia Pendleton's murder, like they are upfront and personal and close to devastation. And I think they have so much in common. And so I think it's going to be very moving tomorrow to see them all together. I'm looking forward to that. This is just another look. It's a sweet photo of them all laughing together. They love to tease each other. When I first started working on this book, I called Bill Burton, who worked for Obama, and I said, how close do you think Bush and Obama really are, And he said, it's not like they're on a text chain, with each other. They don't hang out all the time. Like, this is a good idea, he said, as a work of fiction. But the actual reality of it is, do they like each other? Sure. But they really disagree about policy and everything else. But I think the more we got deeper into the Trump years, the more that connection and, how much similarities there are between these men came into focus, at least for me.
One random aside that this all brought to mind for me was in reading President Obama's volume 1 of his memoirs, the whole period of the economic crisis, and when President Bush allowed President-elect Obama to come into the White House and participate in kind of the last emergency policy decisions that were going to go to Congress. And there was one meeting in particular where I think it was even during the campaign, going back to the campaign, where John McCain and Obama were in the room with all the cabinet and the financial advisors and President Bush, and President Bush and President Obama, or candidate Obama, were kind of meeting each other halfway on things and trying to demonstrate joint leadership. And then Senator McCain at the time had like nothing to say. He just hadn't been prepped for the meeting and tried to make it political and stuff, which was really odd. But there are a lot of moments for folks who are into this kind of history that we can uncover a bit more to kind of find these moments of bipartisanship and also putting country above what's politically expedient for one side or the other, which I know we're kind of in a crisis with all that at the moment. But
oh my gosh.
yeah.
Yeah.
Here's one last one for you.
Yeah, this is just a fun photo of the Obamas going up in the family elevator with Wilson German, who was a longtime doorman who I had interviewed for my book, The Residents, and he passed away from COVID, unfortunately. But he didn't get it while working in the White House. He had retired. But there was just some incredible stories about what it felt like for the African-American staff at the White House to see the first Black family moving in, and, how, and Michelle Obama wrote about this in her book too, looking at these people who looked like her aunts and uncles and grandfather and father, and then this, from the staff's perspective, a couple butlers who had lived through segregation, said they never thought this day would come. And so it was just very emotional for everybody. And I think, the staff is still there. The ones who worked for the Obamas, there's many of them who were still there for Trump. And they're excited to have the Bidens come in because they know kind of what to expect with the Bidens. But, I do wonder what's going through their minds. I mean, I was told by one person on the resident staff that the words packing, moving, transition were not to be uttered. This was like in late November, early December. They were just afraid they were going to be fired. This is their job.
Yeah. It's like scientists being told you can't say climate change in policy and anywho. So I know we're rapidly running through the clock here, which is making me sad because I'm loving this conversation. A couple of topics that I'd love to hit before we open up to audience Q&A. First is about the President's Club, and then we'll get into inaugurations specifically. But for folks who haven't read your book or other books on this topic, can you just kind of lay out what the notion of the President's Club is? What are some of the kind of the rules that are unspoken but exist and that you lay out really clearly in the book?
Yeah, I mean, the President's Club is this group of men, unfortunately, who follow these rules that I think the most important one, and these are all just kind of understandings that they have among each other, is that they don't criticize the sitting president. Jimmy Carter obviously is the outlier there. But, if you do criticize the sitting president, you do it respectfully. And you have respect for the office and for each other and for history. I mean, most of these presidents are huge, history buffs. I mean, Bill Clinton's a voracious reader. We know that Barack Obama, incredibly intelligent and well-read and really interested in the men who came before him. We know especially interested in Abraham Lincoln, right? And so it's that respect for the history of the House. And the interesting thing is, I know Obama would invite historians like Doris Kearns Goodwin and Douglas Brinkley into the White House and ask them, what was FDR's approach to the Depression? And, these kind of big questions. And we didn't see that much. And I certainly don't know anybody who did that for Trump, and the sense of, wanting to learn from the past. And so I think that, not speaking ill of each other, being available to help. I mean, Richard Nixon basically blackmailed Bill Clinton into meeting him at the White House. He was like, he wanted a White House meeting so badly. He was trying so hard to rehabilitate his image. And he eventually called up Bill Clinton's chief of staff, I believe it was his chief of staff, and said, if you don't let me come and see him, I'm going to write like a terrible op-ed in the New York Times. It was just and so he came to the White House. They forged a sort of a friendship where they talked about China and foreign policy. And it's like, you can disagree with someone on so many levels, but take their expertise. And I think that's really what we were missing. So we were missing a lot the last 4 years. But if there had been any attempt at outreach, we know Laura Bush went to the White House a couple of times and met with Melania Trump, which I think is interesting. But there was no outreach whatsoever from President Trump. And it's the president who has to make that first move.
Mm-hmm. The two things to follow up on this. One is, can you tell us a bit about the lives of the presidents after their presidency, and thinking specifically about North Korea and Jimmy Carter in North Korea, and then also Bill Clinton in North Korea, and kind of the way that former presidents can be deployed for special missions, and where some of the pitfalls are with that and where some of the opportunities lie.
Yeah, I mean, Jimmy Carter, even up within the last 4 years, he wanted Trump to send him to North Korea, so that's why we didn't hear a lot from Jimmy Carter that first year that Trump was in office, because he desperately wants to be useful and believes that he can. But Carter and Rosalind Carter went on a diplomatic mission to North Korea. They set this up on their own, told Clinton afterwards, and Clinton kind of had to scramble to act like it was the White House's idea to do this. And that's another one of the rules, is that if you're a former president and you go on and you go to any foreign country and have a meeting with a leader, you should tell the president's office that you're doing this. Like, what is Biden would do that, and he would be in touch with Pence, not with Trump. And he would say, I want to make sure that I'm not saying anything that isn't within U.S. policy right now. Like, what do we stand for? But Carter's just very independent, and he went on this trip. And when he came back, he did an interview with CNN before he briefed Clinton. And he did that when he went to Haiti also. He did that a couple times. And that's another thing you're not supposed to do. I mean, Clinton was just livid that he would go on national television and talk about this agreement, and before he even told him what happened.
And it's so like Jimmy he's proven himself to everyone that he is of extreme intelligence, and like he did not do that without calculating. Like he knew what the response was going to be. He did it for a reason, and he's a really a remarkable diplomat. And the whole period with the Camp David Accords, if anyone is not familiar with that history, really encourage you to check it out. There was a play a few years ago at Arena Stage that covered that history. And, the Iran hostage affair aside, because that was a debacle on multiple levels and some of it was being done against him, but he really achieved some diplomatic victories that other presidents have been chasing aimlessly in their tenure. So a lot of credit does go to him. The other thing that I'd love for you to comment on is the way the values of the President's Club trickle out to the first ladies, to the former vice presidents and such. And one of the things that just kind of comes to mind from the book that was a really special moment was when HW 41 was the first person to call Vice President Gore after he conceded. And that kind of the amazingness of that moment.
Yeah, I mean, HW is a classy guy, right? You can't fault him for that. He's incredible in that way. He called Gore up and he said, I know, something to the effect of, I know what it's like to lose. I know what you must be feeling right now. And Gore was just so touched by that. And that's such a great specific example of this club and of the sense of decorum. And I do wonder about tomorrow if we're going to see Mike Pence take up that mantle. If we're going to see him try to, because we know the Trumps aren't going to be there. Is Mike Pence are Mike Pence and Karen Pence going to, surprise us all? And I think that they probably will be very respectful. I'm not sure, there's not going to be a huge crowd that would be booing them on the lawn, so on the mall. So, but I interviewed Biden about Pence for a book I did on vice presidents, and he was very complimentary about Pence. He said, look, I disagree with him on politics, policy, everything, but he's somebody you can talk to. And so they kept in touch. Biden told me they talked about once a month at the beginning of Trump's term, because he had no one else he could talk to. When he, would go on a trip, Biden knew so many foreign leaders. And so he couldn't call Trump. He had to be able to call Pence. And so another thing that someone brought up today that hadn't thought of before, and I'm not sure if you have, is that Pence would need Biden to approve Secret Service coverage beyond the initial 6 months. So a vice president gets 6 months. And right now, don't you think he's going to need it for a while? Yeah.
If only because of people within his party.
Yeah.
That's crazier. But so thinking about the moment and the lead up to tomorrow of inaugurations, inaugurations are in many ways inflection points in the story, right? So they're like, it's the reset, and then the new arc starts with a new administration and such. What are some of the high points in inauguration history in your mind? Even if we just think about, well, let's put FDR and JFK to the side. They're so iconic, but I know, I'm sorry. What are some of the other moments that we should be recalling more about inaugurations?
Well, I think if you're really like a history dork, I think one of the best inaugurations to watch is Jimmy Carter's, when he thanks Gerald Ford, and Gerald Ford stands up and they shake hands, and it's just a really kind of great moment. I mean, one of the first things Jimmy Carter does is thank Gerald Ford for getting us through the post-Watergate years, and obviously, I mean, Ford's pardon of Nixon led to led to his defeat. So he believed it had to be done. And I actually don't think this is going to be such a reset moment, because we're still, unfortunately, caught up in the Trump show, right? There's going to be the Senate vote on impeachment. It just seems to never end. And I really hope for us as a country that we can have that inflection point, that reset, and move forward. And I think it's like you can't wash your hands of this era, because people still want to hold Trump and some people worked for him accountable. Yep.
I saw like an hour ago, one of the characters from the coup day, one of the senators, is already trying to block a nomination for an essential national security cabinet post. Yeah. And it's like, oh, we're not even there yet.
I know.
Remarkable. So before we go up to the audience Q&A, can you tell us a bit about your hope with your children's book and how you kind of approach the real special thing of teaching this history and developing a love of American history and White House history for younger people?
Well, it's a really different experience writing a children's book, right? Because it's for 8 to 12-year-olds. So I wanted to talk to them about 9/11, the assassination, Kennedy assassination, Lincoln's assassination. I mean, these kind of dark moments in our history in a way that wasn't traumatizing, but was, I think kids know a lot more than we think they do. And so I wanted to pepper it with a lot of like, did you know? And here's interesting little factoids. And then here's some heavier stories. And here's what it's like to grow up in the White House. And I also think kids love the sense of like, getting inside a space and seeing a layout. So I have like a map of the White House in there. They like to be very in the minutia of things. They want to know, well, where are the bedrooms, and where's the ground floor kitchen, and all of that. So, but I also wanted to draw attention to the incredible African American staff who, Preston Bruce, who was a White House doorman, dedicated his life to that job, was so close to the Kennedys that he walked in the procession to JFK's funeral. I mean, these kind of unsung heroes at the White House that I think it's important for kids to know about.
Cool. Just random musings are that I think there's a book to be had on the presidents and sports and baseball in particular. And I had the great fortune of being at one of the World Series games a couple of years ago, and it was the game where President Trump came, and wow. it was a whole moment. It was pretty wild. And then we saw like Dr. Fauci now during the pandemic going to throw a first pitch, which didn't quite go straight. But a lot of cool Americana and sports things wrapped up.
I know somebody who's writing a book about that.
Really? Oh my God. That's
so amazing. I'll tell you when it comes out, because he's really, it's a great book idea, because there's all different. I mean, you could do Obama and basketball and golf and Bush and mountain biking and all that. You could do all different sports. Yeah. You could just do presidents in baseball too.
Yeah. When I was intern, it was coincided with the time when President Obama brought the Chicago Bears from the 80s to kind of have their moment, which they hadn't had since at all back then, which is kind of wild. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on there. Great. I'm going to switch over to audience questions real quick for our last few minutes. And thank you to Kate for indulging all of my silly questions.
Oh my gosh, you know a lot about this.
No, it's fabulous. I really love your books, and I'm so glad that we could chat. Okay, so first question here is, other than having a second man, are there any protocols that will change under the new administration? I'm guessing specifically because of the gender roles being new for the vice president and second gentleman.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer to that yet. I think they're still trying to figure it out. I know that it's important to Doug Emhoff, the second gentleman, to hire people who have a lot of administration experience in this way. I think they're trying to really lean into people who are very experienced, which makes me think that maybe he's going to be a traditional second spouse, which is somebody who supports the vice president, but stays in the shadows a little bit. I think we've seen that with him already, is that he's willing to take that supporting actor role, which I think is fantastic and should be celebrated. But because it's what women have been doing forever, and it's nice to see a man not willing to let his wife shine, just being supportive of his wife.
Yeah, our friends over at Library of Congress had him over a couple, or maybe last week, and they just released a video this week where he went to the Library of Congress to learn about his role as second spouse, and it's really cute. Highly recommend everyone check it out. And he's also going to be a law professor, so it's nice to see the tradition that Dr. Biden started of actually actively teaching during their time of the administration. And of course, Dr. Biden plans to continue that as well now that she's first lady coming up.
We'll see if she can do that. I'm very curious. Yeah. Like, I know someone who works for her who's kind of like, we are hopeful that we can do it, but we just kind of have to see, because you know how much work a first lady has. I mean, they don't have to do that much if they don't want to, but she strikes me as someone who's going to want to do something big coming on the heels of a first lady who's been so private and sort of non-existent in most people's lives. And so she's going to really, I think she's going to be an incredibly active first lady.
Mm-hmm. And I saw that joining forces is coming back, which is was her initiative with First Lady Obama back in the 44 term, which is really cool. Yeah. So next question is from Lorraine, who asks, is there a vice president's club, and what are some interesting relationships among them?
I mean, there is definitely a friendship among the vice presidents. Walter Mondale is Jimmy Carter's vice president, and he is kind of seen as the elder statesman of that club. And so every vice president has talked to him. And I am sure, although I don't know, that Kamala Harris would have talked to him too, because I know that Joe Biden talked to him, Al Gore, Dick Cheney, they all talk to him before they take office, to even Mike Pence, to ask, for his advice, because he's considered such a successful vice president. He, was involved in everything. He didn't have just one thing Al Gore did, right, was that he kind of siloed things. He had he wanted to handle certain, government, reorganization was his thing. And that usually doesn't work as well. We've seen in the modern era for vice presidents, it's better to do what Biden did. I think we've seen, where you're the last person in the room, you're the person who the president turns to for advice. And we see Kamala Harris at every event with Biden practically, right? Every announcement he's made in Wilmington of any positions in his cabinet or administration. And so I think she's going to follow that model that Biden had with Obama.
CNN had a really cool special on the vice presidents within the last few months. Did you have anything to do with that, or did they use your work at all?
No, I didn't. But the funny thing is, I am a contributor for CNN, and I worked on the First Lady's special with them. But the person who put that together started working on it 4 years ago. And he contacted me, and the hardest vice president to get, he was like, I heard that you got an interview with Al Gore. Can you please help me get an interview with him? And it's true that Al Gore is so hard. It's so hard to get. And I think it's because, he doesn't want to relive, he doesn't want to be asked about Hillary Clinton, especially back then. The easiest person to get an interview with, I found, vice president wise, was Dick Cheney. He just loves talking about the history of the vice presidency. And, he loves talking about the Ford administration years and all of that kind of very wonky stuff. because he doesn't get asked that as much about the war in Iraq and all.
Yeah.
You know?
One of the things that books like yours bring to light is the way that so many individuals progress through different administrations within their own party and sometimes across party lines. If you think Kissinger across lines, many others as well. But another person, Robert Gates, was a great example of President Obama keeping a cabinet secretary on for the benefit of the country and kind of sustaining, some projects that were going on. And Cheney.
I'm wondering though, do you think Biden should nominate a moderate Republican, like a Jeff Flake or somebody who has been outspoken in a cabinet role or in some advisory role? Would that infuriate liberals?
Yeah, I think that one of the narratives that doesn't get explored as much right now is that there is a huge amount of division within the left on a lot of things, and every appointment that the transition was putting out was being fiercely criticized. Even just the nomination for Senator Padilla, for example, in California, and there was a lot of appropriate race-focused questions about equity and diversity and representation. But yeah, I think someone was mentioning yesterday when I was watching one of the news stations that we're really living with almost 4 parties right now. Mm. And there's a split within each of the 2 major parties, and how that's going to kind of shake out going forward, nobody knows. And like for Liz Cheney as a standard bearer of the Republican Party to be getting attacked from her right and praised from the left is like, we're in a whole new status quo. And the thing of the President's Club that really creates this stark contrast in the moment that we're living in now is that before this moment that we're living in, if we think about the last 4 or 5 years, there was that level of civility where we kind of knew what to expect to a certain extent because there was the certain amount of respect for the office and for the way things worked. But things are really different right now. And, I think one of the things and this is personal opinion, not the opinion of the library, one of the things that President Biden will inevitably get criticized about from the left side of things is reaching to the center and including people on the moderate right more than some folks on the left might desire. So it'll be really interesting. And there's a lot going on, like even the fact that he's planning to go to St. Matthew's Cathedral instead of to St. John's for the Mass tomorrow. I think tomorrow morning, I believe. Yeah. So there's a lot of tradition that's changing, and there's so much that's familiar with President-elect Biden in terms of the presidencies, and there's so much that's different that folks aren't really focused on so far. And he's the second Catholic president in our history, and that is a huge deal. And half of American Catholics detest him, which that's a whole different place from when JFK was coming into office. So lots of fascinating history. And we're going to end on one last question, which is a favorite question of mine that's come in from our dear friend, Miss Vivian, who lives in Oxon Hill and is one of our groupies for the library's programs, who asks, what was it like meeting Michelle Obama?
Well, she's very, kind, and, she was very warm. And I think she is somebody. So it was, I met her at a lunch that she had for female reporters. Well, it was for East Wing reporters, and we just all happened to be women, right? Covering the First Lady. And, she was just somebody that you felt you could immediately talk to and have a conversation with, not at all kind of stilted or forced, or kind of like what you see is what you get. And that's what made me want to write my first book, The Residents, was her relationship with the staff. I could just tell, she was joking around with the butlers who were serving us. You could tell that she was a normal person. She came from a middle-class family, right? And this is she kind of was pinching herself, right? It's just, and so I think there's something about that relatability that she had that's very, I think Joe Biden is gonna have some of that too, this sense of warmth. And, she's a Italian American, middle class family, same thing. I think some of it's the roots and your childhood and your upbringing and how you were raised. And so there's just a warmth to both Dr. Biden and Michelle Obama and Laura Bush, honestly. And Barbara Bush, who was tough, and when I interviewed her, she scared me a little bit because, you know, she could be very cutting. But they're just, like, they just treat you like we're all human beings. And I think that's what I try to do with my books, is that, you know, we all go through loss and love and heartbreak and everything in life is that's the thing that binds us. And that's what we're going to see with Biden, I think. So it'll be so interesting to see him tomorrow and to hear what he has to say. You know, I know he's working on the speech with John Meacham and Mike Donnellan, who's been his longtime aide, and how specific he's going to get about, you know, if he does like an FDR New Deal thing. I think that's not what people want to hear. I think they want to hear like a broad picture binding us together. And it'll be great to see Michelle Obama, Laura Bush, Hillary Clinton. It's going to be amazing.
And on that note of John Meacham, just to kind of reiterate how crazy the times we are living in, when John Meacham and Douglas Brinkley endorse a candidate for president, like, we know there's something crazy going on, because they are historically so respectful of the line of being a historian and not publicly engaging in the actual politics, even though of course, everyone has their own personal opinions. But it's, you know, we're living in crazy times, and every day is filled with history, from the first scroll through Twitter in the morning till like the doom scrolling at 1 a.m, which I'm doing way too much of, but
not anymore. You're not going to.
I have, knock on wood.
Okay.
It's calming down. So I'm going to invite our colleague Kyla back on, who's going to close us out here. Hi, Kyla. Welcome back.
Hi. Thank you so much. This has been a totally fascinating conversation. So thank you so much for being here and letting me be part of it. It's been incredible. Kate, thank you for your time and your insight and for being with us this evening. If for those of you watching, if you're like me and suddenly need to get a whole bunch of books, you can pick up copies of Kate's books at the library's partner bookstore, Loyalty Books, or you can get it from your local library, and our friends PGC MLS can hook you up with a library card if you need one. And even if you don't live nearby, they can get you a virtual library card. So reach out to them. I also need to give a shout out to the ASL interpreter. You have just been incredible, just wonderful job. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you as always to Nick, the moderator, and the library COO of Outreach and Communication. We so appreciate our ongoing partnership with you and being able to bring events like this to the public. We have many more events coming up, and I'd like to bring just a couple of them to the attention of everybody watching. This Thursday, January 21st at 4 p.m., we are debuting a young adult book group, and we're going to talk about the blockbuster novel Six O'Crows. Next week, Tuesday, the library welcomes novelist Beth Kander to talk about her smash YA trilogy, Original Sin. And on the 27th, the library is holding an open mic hosted by Marissa Michelle. And our diversity dialogue with the library continues in February, when we will be talking about the book Between the World and Me. And there's a lot more great programming coming your way, so you can learn about what I just told you about and other upcoming events by visiting the library's events page at pgcmls.info/events. Or you can check out the Human Relations Commission's events page at tinyurl.com/PGCHRC events. And you can follow us on Twitter at HRCPG County, and the library across all social media platforms at PGC MLS. So once again, thank you everyone for being here this evening. Best wishes and happy inauguration.
Thank you,
everyone. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Kyla. Thanks, Elle.
Thanks, Nick.
Stay safe, everyone. Bye-bye.